Companies don't get built in 2 years. Ideas don't come to life in 18 months. It takes 4, 5, 6 years. You have to be persistent behind it. As an entrepreneur, you're in the business of failure, you're in the business of risk, and you are in the business of motivating others. Don't fear the unknown. Take the road less traveled.
Hi everyone, and welcome to Bright Founder Talk at TAMI. TAMI is an international software development company that designs, builds, and delivers software for sustainable businesses and promising startups. Let's meet our today's guest, Janak Joshi, Senior Vice President of Life Image. Janak, hi, how are you?
Nice to meet you, and thank you for the invitation.
It's morning in the US, you've just started your day. So what do you need in your job to get you jumping out of bed?
As a head of technology, believe it or not, but we do things less technology related, but more strategy related. So in the beginning of every day that we do, especially as entrepreneurs of big companies, is figure out what are some of the risks associated with getting through the day, what are some of the barriers that we need to kind of remove, and what are some of these strategic decisions that we need to make. I'm of a big proponent to say that I need to make at least 3 decisions a day that moves the company forward. So I always look for that. Now, technology is a big part of what we do, of what I do and my function is, but I don't lead with technology. I lead with the vision in terms of what do I need to get done in order to move ahead. So that is kind of like my in the beginning of the day. So yes, it's about 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time here right now.
We're happy that you find time to be with us today. Could you please tell us briefly who is Janak? You can even surprise us with the fact that not so many people know.
So I'm an entrepreneur first. I'm a first generation immigrant to United States. I actually came here several years ago. And, I went to college here like most people would my age. And I finished my college degree and my MBA. And the first job I thought was, wait a minute, why do I need to work for someone and have them tell me what to do? I see a problem, I'd like to fix it, and maybe there's a better way to fix it. And I would say most entrepreneurs like me and my DNA always thinks like that, saying if it's a problem, I'll be first in line to stand up and get it done. So that's what I did. And that was my first taste of being an entrepreneur. And while in college, I had kind of needed very creative ways to make money. So obviously, my intuition about where to extract value from my surroundings was always encouraged. And the culture in the US is heavily supported for entrepreneurs, to be very frank. So if you have an idea, the capitalistic culture here says, absolutely, here's some money, go ahead and do it. So that I really love that. And that really shaped me as a person. I'm big into EDM music. So I decided to be a DJ and make some money playing EDM. Decided to essentially have small businesses on campus. But then my first break came when I raised about $4 million to start my first startup. And we sold it to a company in Stockholm, Sweden, Spry Media Group. And that was the beginning of a very exciting journey henceforth. And I'm not a very formal person. Unlike many people from corporate America who wear a suit and they tend to be very formal. And you will see that most entrepreneurs are not formal. They will just say, "Oh, here's a problem. Okay, let's get it done." So I think it's very important for personalities like me at the end of the day to be challenged. And if there is no challenge, we get bored really fast. We're not status quo people. And every time any higher up has ever mentioned to me that, oh, yeah, you have to maintain this format or you have to do X or you have to do Y, I pretty much do the opposite and wait and see what happens. Not because I'm trying to be a jerk about it, but I I always want to investigate and understand what is it that makes other people conformists as a term, and what is it that people like me don't like about being a conformist? What happens if you're not conforming to the rules? Um, so anyway, that's me in a nutshell, and what challenges me.
I've noticed on your LinkedIn that you've been working in the healthcare industry for long years. Why did you choose exactly this sphere? Can you say that is your passion?
Yeah, I mean, to be very frank, I wanted to be a doctor, and I'm being just very honest here. I did not have the grades to be a doctor,
Mm-hmm.
and I was encouraged to not be a doctor because it's a long journey and you don't make a lot of money in the beginning. So I was told as a kid, as a teenager, saying, yeah, it's a bad idea. You shouldn't do it because you won't be able to do it. So unfortunately, I listened to everybody who was guiding me. But then there was something about healthcare and about the impact on human life that really motivated me. There are not many businesses on this planet where you can work and say, hey, I saved a life today. I actually saved a life. Meaning, if
Mm-hmm.
I did not do what I did, somebody would die. Or if I did not do what I did today, somebody would not be able to live the life that they wanted. There are very few ideas and very few businesses and industries in this world that allow you to do that. So that was the number one motivation: is how do I impact humanity at massive scale? And the second reason for healthcare is healthcare in general, and this is not just US, is actually the biggest mess around the world. If you want to get a surgical operation,
Mm-hmm.
if you want to get a procedure right now, it's a nightmare. Like, okay, who do I talk to? What's going to happen to me? How is this going to be structured? Who's going to pay for it? How is this going to be paid for, etc. So there are so many questions that are unanswered, whether it's Ukraine or whether it's UK or whether it's Sweden, the Scandinavian countries, or whether it's Germany. I notice this all around.
What part of your job do you find the most difficult?
It's a double-edged sword. The To be very frank, it's people management.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Managing people is not keeping them in line, but managing people in an entrepreneurial setting is about motivation. It's how can I motivate you to be your best and not just show up, do the bare minimum, and leave. If you want to do that, sure, there are companies, big companies that you can go and work for them and you can make that happen. It's a lifestyle choice. It's not good or bad. It's a lifestyle choice. But how do I motivate people? How do I recruit them? And
Mm-hmm.
how do I keep them in the company? Because, younger people, I mean, I'm not that much older, so people, our generation, um, they like to stay with the company for 12 to 18 months, 24 months and say, okay, I'm done. But then you also have to think that companies don't get built in 2 years. Ideas don't come to life in 18 months. It takes 4, 5, 6 years. You have to be persistent behind it. So I think that has been one of the biggest challenges of um, attracting the right people, keeping them motivated in the company, and retaining them long term. Because you cannot do what we do with people who come and go in 18 months. It's impossible. So, and that's not just my challenge. I talk to a lot of entrepreneurs. That's actually the number one challenge for most people in the
Mm-hmm.
industry.
Okay, so as you mentioned already, like the people, was it hard to find your team members?
It's one of the hardest jobs. So if you ask any entrepreneur saying, "Hey, you have a great idea, you even got money in the bank from investors.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't you have a team? It's been 6 months. It's been 8 months. Why haven't you hired a CTO? Why haven't you hired a chief financial officer?" And they will tell you exactly what I told you, saying, well, but I can't find them. And if I find them, they're not truly entrepreneurs or they're not the right fit for the idea that we are doing. So, um, finding the right people with the right DNA, and I use I tend to use the word tribe. Finding your tribe
Mhm.
is very, very tough in today's market.
Life Image was founded in 2008. On your website, it is said that the company was created to solve the toughest challenges in healthcare industry. Could you please describe in detail that exact problem and the solution which you found?
The answers to some of the most complex questions often lay buried in some of the simplest solutions, right? I mean,
Mhm.
I always feel that the idea behind Uber, Airbnb, etc., are not very difficult to replicate. If I give you enough money, you can create an Uber app in 6 months, maybe less. Um, so technology is often not a barrier to many of these things. It's usually the willingness of different people to come together and work in cohesion as a partnership. In healthcare, it's a double-edged sword. Healthcare, the problem is, I would say, 20 to 30% technology
Mhm.
because of the fragmentation of different instruments, radiology instruments, etc. And I'll explain this specific problem. The second part in healthcare is every hospital thinks that they're unique. And this is not just a US issue, it's a global issue, which means that if you get a hip surgery at a hospital in Ukraine, and if you get a hip surgery at a hospital in Boston, you're getting the same hip from the same manufacturer, and the surgical procedure process is exactly the same, but the workflow that surrounds it, of how do you get prepped,
Mhm.
when do you get a hip X-ray, what kind of meds are administered to you, how much dosage, how much frequency, etc. That entire clinical workflow is completely different. Or so there is no consistency in some of these clinical workflows. So in radiology, it's the same, where there was no consistency in the workflows for treatment of patients with stroke, treatment of patients with surgeries, treatment of patients who come from mammograms, etc. There was so as a baseline, there was always a deviation between 30 to 70% deviation from benchmark. And so that's problem number two, is there's no consistency in clinical workflows across hospitals. And the third problem in healthcare is, um, I mean, it's especially true for US, was there are a lot of repeat tests, unnecessary tests,
Mhm.
unintended tests. So you will go to physician A and say, hey, um, I need a chest x-ray. Or the physician will tell you, you need a chest x-ray. Great. And then the physician will say, oh, based on the reading, you need to see a specialist. Go see a specialist. You go to a specialist, and the specialist will say, you need a chest x ray. And you'll be like, but I just got one. He's like, yeah, but I don't believe it. And your first question is, what do you mean you don't believe it? It's an x ray. Whether you do it on a Philips machine or a GE or a Siemens machine, shouldn't it be the same? And there are many, many reasons behind why people do that, because it's a revenue generation aspect. There is clinical competency associated with generating some of these images. There is confidence levels. There are hundreds of reasons behind why physicians do that. They're not always wrong, right? But there is a big percentage of unnecessary tests and repeat tests that can be
Mhm.
prevented, not just in radiology, but even in lab tests, even in other procedures. Um, so those are the three aspects that we tackle, saying, okay, if I get seen at hospital A on the same street and they do a chest x-ray or a mammogram or an ultrasound for me, I cannot even cross the road and share that chest x-ray to a doctor who's across the building. What is wrong with this picture? Okay. And
Mhm.
not only that, but because of the fragmentation of all the instruments, you have Agfa, Fuji, Konica, GE, Philips, Siemens, all these manufacturers who have these different radiology machines. Each one of them would have their own specific way of managing images
Mhm.
and distribution of images. So about 10 or 15 years ago, they would give you a CD saying, here you go, here's your
Mhm.
x-ray, go take it to the doctor. And then you would be very happy and confident saying, oh, great, I have access to it. You would hand it to the doctor and say, look, I have my x-ray and I'm ready for a consult. And the physician there would say, I don't know how to read the CD. Or if he has a CD reader, he or she will say, I can't read this format. This is impossible. So the problem that Life Image tackled was essentially the ability to share radiology images across hospitals and patients in a consistent, seamless, and timely manner. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
It was one of the hardest problems to solve. Because imagine you have to go from instrument A with a software X to instrument B and software Y, all within minutes. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And solve that problem in a way that does not compromise the clinical integrity of the data that you're sharing. You can't get a chest x-ray at the other end and say, yeah, the format doesn't look right, but I'm still going to diagnose you. That's not allowed. You can't do that. So going from a multi-instrument, multi-software platform across institutions and maintain consistency and integrity of the data and the clinical workflows is the problem that Life Image solved. And you can only do that if you're able to create a network, which means that it was a lot of hard work to go from hospital to hospital to hospital to hospital and bring them as a part of the network. It's kind of the analogy I always make is imagine sending a text message from an Android phone to an iPhone.
Mm-hmm.
You can do that today. You don't think that, oh, wow, different platforms, different instruments, different companies, different countries, but it's still possible, right? How do you do that? Well, translate that same thing into the network that Life Image created, where the dependency on the instrument or the software or the geographic location or the institution or the network that supports it is irrelevant. You can still send a chest x-ray just like a text message. You should be able to do that. It's 2022, right? So that's the problem we solve.
I watched one of your interviews where you said that we are in the 1997 of artificial intelligence. Could you please explain your idea regarding artificial intelligence?
AI in healthcare is very different than AI in defense, is very different than AI in e-commerce, etc. Because there are different levels of maturity, and the maturity of any AI model is highly dependent on the data that you use to feed the AI model, number one, and number two, how long has that data model been in utility to continue improving the learning process that feeds into the yield that you get from any model. You know, if somebody says like, hey, I created an AI model, I used 100 customers and I've only used it in one customer for one use case for 10 days. Your immediate thought is like, but you cannot put it in production. That's not very mature. Can you have more customers and use it a little bit longer and see how it performs? So that's the same issue with healthcare, is that the quality, maturity, and the depth of the data that is often used for a lot of these AI models does not have enough or does not yield enough confidence levels for many physicians, many clinical researchers to continue or to have 100% belief that, oh yeah, the model says X, so it should be X. There are a tremendous amount of validation efforts that have to go despite AI validations processes behind the scenes, specifically in pharma, right? I mean, we saw that in the vaccine development with COVID, where all these pharma companies had really sophisticated AI models, but then they had armies of people continuing to validate it. Well, if AI was that sophisticated, why would you need thousands and thousands and thousands of scientists and physicians looking at these AI models constantly, right? Like you would immediately say, yeah, this is correct. We should do X. So in terms of the maturity curve, I mean, typically, if you look at a bell curve of any maturity model, we're at the bottom left, which means that we're still now learning, saying, oh, you need this data profile to feed this data model, or the learning processes and the biases need to be addressed in a certain way which is different from what we had originally thought, or or the availability of information, which is often the most hardest thing, like where do you buy the information to feed the data, is now beginning to emerge as a core competency across a lot of these companies, right? So you're able to access a lot more healthcare data compared to say 10 years ago or even 5 years ago. And the quality and maturity of the data is important. There's a term that many pharma companies use to say that, hey, I'm developing an AI model. Is your data regulatory grade? It's an industry term, but the regulatory grade as a term used by pharma companies often attributes to the fact that is your data clinically validated? Is it appropriately labeled? Does it have the right tags for the use cases? Is it normalized in a way that we would want to use it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? So you cannot just buy a bunch of rows and columns and say, it's great, now I'm going to create an AI model. You cannot do that. It often takes months or several years to even perfect once you have access to the data. And that time frame is getting shorter to put existing data that you buy to operational use. I mean, if you think about your buying experience, I was still in college, so I don't know what the mid or late 90s typically looked like, um, but I remember a lot of people telling me saying, yeah, you had to go to a website and it cost millions of dollars to build a website, and the website couldn't predict who you are. It had no idea who you are as a customer. That's where the AI model is. The AI models in healthcare today are genericized. They still have a lot of biases. The data that trains these AI models are often not of high quality, or are often outdated, because in healthcare, you cannot use data that's 10 years old for today's models. So the currency of the data, as in how current is the data, is incredibly important, because that's what feeds into the learning model constantly. And not all the biases are known, right? In medicine, there's actually what to teach physicians is an entire chapter on clinical biases. And I forget how many biases exist. I think there are about 10 or 15. But if you ask any data scientist saying, hey, doctors are taught about these 10 or 15 biases, can you replicate them in your data model to get the perfect model? The data scientist will laugh at you and say, you're crazy. This is impossible. Or we are not there yet. This is very hard to replicate, or it's very expensive. So if it's very hard, it does not exist, it's impossible. If I hear those arguments, we're not there yet. I think we're at least 15 to 20 years before the perfect, I should never say the perfect AI model exists, but where the confidence levels based on decisions fueled by AI models is going to be very high, where you would not need a human to say, I don't think that's right. I think more and more people, as time goes by, will say, yep, I believe it 100% blindly. This is how it should be.
Actually, we are moving to the last question, but I can say that it's the most captivating question for our watchers. So what the piece of advice can you give to our watchers, to young entrepreneurs, to the startuppers?
So I can give you the generic answer that most entrepreneurs would give, saying, yes, find a good problem to solve, find a problem that everybody wants to pay for, and find the right market. Most people know that. I'm not going to say that. But those are all objective, academic, and the usual answers. The subjective response to your question is, don't fear the unknown. Take the road less traveled. Um, be be a risk taker, and be able to have enough confidence in yourself, because as an entrepreneur, you're not just responsible for yourself, but now you suddenly get responsible for everybody who believes in you. If I tell you saying, hey, I have a great idea, and I motivate you, and you join me, and I pay you a salary, suddenly your paycheck is based on my success and my word. So if I screw up, you get fired. not because I want to fire you, but because I can't pay you anymore. And now your life is dependent on me. So as an entrepreneur, you have to understand that it's not just that you are independent and you don't work for somebody else, but now you have your entire tribe who looks up to you and says, he will fix the problem or she knows what she's doing. You see what I mean? So that level of responsibility is a very different mindset, saying, oh, I can't do X or I can't do Y. I would also say that the entrepreneurship is more of a global phenomenon now, which means that you don't have to fear or worry that, you know, I'm in Kiev or I'm in somewhere else in the world. How am I going to get access to money? If the idea is right, um, entrepreneurs can fuel and fund you globally, whether it's somebody sitting in Singapore or Hong Kong or Shanghai or Bombay or UK, doesn't matter. If for the right idea, there's tremendous amount of capital available even right now, and always will be. A lot of people after every downturn say, "Oh, well, the capital is going to dry up," and people are essentially sitting on a lot of cash, and interest rates are high. Well, that happened in the 90s. That happened in 95. That happened in 2000. That happened in 2008, 2009. That's happening right now. But guess what? Within 12 to 18 months, suddenly all hell breaks loose and says, hey, this company got $100 million to do X. And you're sitting there scratching your head and say, 100 million for what? What are they doing now? This doesn't sound, this is silly. So after every economic downturn, there is a flood of either funding or ideas that people want to create. So keep that into account, that the economies now are global, that they're not limited by virtue of your geographic area. If you have a friend who has an idea, talk to somebody in Silicon Valley, talk to somebody in London, talk to somebody in Berlin, Germany. It doesn't matter. Investors are everywhere. Now, I'm not saying it's easier said than done to do all of the above, saying, yes, take a risk, be responsible for others, raise money from elsewhere. So the last thing would say that entrepreneurship is a lifestyle. You have to have the word I often use is grit, GRIT. You have to have the grit to execute on the ideas that truly appeal to you. A lot of people have a lot of great ideas, but then you only see 0.1% of the people actually be entrepreneurs. Why is that? Because a lot of people are not comfortable executing on them. The next time somebody tells you saying, I got a great idea, instead of saying, let's hear the idea, you should say, well, why haven't you done anything about it? Well, therein lies your answer. It's like, oh, but I have to pay rent, and I don't want to be responsible for people.
Yeah.
You get usual answers, and it's like, well, there you go, right? Say it's a lifestyle. It's not a job. Entrepreneurship is a lifestyle choice. There is no vacation. There is no like, oh, I'm going to close the laptop because I have yoga class at 7 p.m. It's none of that. None. Zero. Right? I mean, during my time at Life Image, no, what motivated me is like, we really have to get this right. We really have to get to the next level. We have to solve this problem. We have to do X. So there's a lot of self-motivation that comes into play in entrepreneurship. And if you don't have that, it's very difficult to just sit on a customer. A lot of people just say that, hey, I got this customer, I got that customer, I'm an entrepreneur. No, you're a software development company. You have two customers who are paying you for two different use cases. An entrepreneur is like, how do I go from two customers to 200 in 3 years or less without putting in a lot of human capital? How do I replicate that? So the replicability, reproducibility of the process that allows you to scale is incredibly important in entrepreneurship. And that's why they call it the art of entrepreneurship, not the science of entrepreneurship. So anyway, those are my kind of recommendations to say that, hey, it's not really a technology problem. It's a personality thing. It's a lifestyle.
Thank you for sharing with us your whole story and all of the insights. It was a great conversation, and I was happy to spend this 1 hour in the evening.
Well, thank you so much. This was fantastic. And I wish to, chat with you guys again, maybe in a larger forum.